Hi, Tip.
Hazel wants to say hi too.
Yes,
What
I'm
are you doing?
sure they do.
Yeah, they aren't getting as excited because I have the earbuds in. They can't hear.
Can't
So.
hear. Okay.
So, in my Wild Mind series, usually I talk about what the outdoors means to people and how they got started spending time outside, how they spend time outside, and things like that. So, do you want to just talk about how you started spending time outside? I know that's kind of a weird question because it seems like you've just always spent time outside.
I have. I grew up on a farm, so I was outside working around the farm for about as far back as I can ever remember. We worked and we farmed, and then when we wasn't farming, we was basically doing something outdoors, but we wasn't working. We was just enjoying it. Ever since I was a little kid, there was always a group of Dad's friends, and whenever it rained where they couldn't farm, why they just automatically all came here and they would go squirrel hunting or just sit around and visit and maybe target shoot. They were all avid at shooting handguns. And even the squirrel hunting, the limit of squirrels was six. You got six bullets. It was a friendly competition, and they all went squirrel hunting. And that was usually every Sunday, and then every time it rained, where we couldn't be working in the fields.
You and your dad also, you guys coon hunted a lot too, didn't you?
Well, yeah, when farming was over with, back then there was a lot of geese here. We'd hunt a few geese. Dad coon hunted. We deer hunted. I was maybe 12, 13 years old when he took me, and I was able to shoot my first deer. At least once every fall, all the Cub Scouts would come out, and Dad would take them coon hunting. Like I said, we had a reunion here not long ago, and I was talking to one of them, and he was talking about how he remembered going on the Cub Scout coon hunts with Dad all the time.
I didn't know that Granddad did that. He also was kind of involved in hunter education then, like you were. So
In
you
a different,
both kind of did that.
yeah. He did it in his way, and Dad he trapped. Back at that time, there was a bounty on coyotes in the county. I'm pretty sure they haven't done that for years, but way back then there was. The Game Commission had a state trapper who would come in and teach the farmers, mostly the ones with livestock, how to trap coyotes. Whenever they did that, they'd always call Dad.
So how did you get started with bow hunting? Was there a person that was involved for sparking your interest in archery and in bows, or did you
Well,
just kind
kind
of
of.
come across it yourself?
I had a couple of cousins. I watched them when they were young shoot their bows, and of course there wasn't any compounds back then. It was all recurve longbow, and I guess I watched those, and I remember seeing those bright colored feathers on the arrows, flying from the bow to the target, and I think it kind of intrigued me. But I finally, probably when I was 14, 15 years old, got my hands on a Browning, I think it was a Safari 1 or 2, whichever one was the longer bow. And I thought, well, I'm going to learn to shoot this. And I go out and shoot it, and it just beat my arm, take the skin off of it. It hurt. It was black and blue, and I couldn't do it. And I put it up. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. Some years later, a guy come by, and we was talking about it, and I said, well, I tried, but I couldn't stand to shoot it. I said, the string would hit my arm every time I let go of it. He said, let's give it a try. So he shot 2 or 3 times, and he handed me his bow, and I picked it up and I started to draw it, and he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. He said, what are you doing? He said, you can't shoot a right-handed bow left-handed or it's going to beat your arm to pieces. I didn't know there was such a thing as a rider left-handed. And just by chance, his wife had a light poundage left-handed recurve, and he got it, and we got back together. And of course, I couldn't hit nothing, but the string quit hitting my arm. Thank goodness. Yeah, I got it. I kind of got interested in it, and he and I would get together once in a while and shoot, and he would try to help me. So at that time, I was just trying to learn to shoot. You could get no information. I finally did find on a magazine rack, I can't remember if it was Bow and Arrow or an old bow hunter magazine, and I started buying it, and reading and trying to learn. It was kind of a slow deal. But anyway, after that, Guy Prime, he had a sporting goods store there in Rockport. And I think he said he bought one book of tags, or two books, and he would sell maybe 5 or 6 deer tags for the whole area. It was just not big, and I forget what year it was. It was in the 50s, I think, when Missouri started their first archery deer season.
When did Brickyard Hill Bowhunters start up, the archery club? Because I remember, growing up and shooting in that club, but I don't remember when it started. And of course, now it doesn't exist, and it's all grown over.
It's like most archery clubs. They go for a while and then they fall apart. But yeah,
they lasted a while though, because it seems like we did it all through my childhood.
Yeah, and I was told, and I vaguely remember it when I was little, there was an archery club before that. I vaguely remember in the wintertime they used to shoot indoors in the memorial building.
That was before Brickyard Hill?
Oh, way before. Matter of fact, where the archery range was set up for Brickyard Hill, that club that I was talking about that shot indoors, they had a range there, an outdoor range. But that was, I don't know, I think that was probably in the, I'm going to say early 60s. Maybe. I'm not. So
exactly. Did Brickyard Hill replace them?
It was gone for years and years. And like I said, once they opened an archery deer season, interest grew in it. And also the compound bow started showing up. Trying to think, that was in the 60s, early 70s. But I remember when they first come out, because the guy that got me started with the recurve, he bought a bear compound and I bought one. And it was quite different, but you had like 50% let off and you could put a sight on it and set the sight pins. Well, that was a tremendous boost in accuracy, kind of shortened the learning curve, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, and then I think popularity really skyrocketed once compound showed up.
So you shot compound for a while, but then you went back to traditional after a while.
I shot a compound.
So what made you go back to traditional? Can you explain the difference between compound and traditional for people who might not know?
It's kind of like this. For example, back in the day, if you shot a 60-pound recurve, when you come to full draw and anchored against the side of your face, you were holding 60 pounds. If you had a 60-pound compound, some of the early ones were 30% let off, but ones I bought was 50%. So if you were shooting 60 pounds, once you got back to your face, you was only holding 30. And that made a world of difference in being able to hold steady and take time to aim. So it did change a lot, changed the sport. Then really, I think things skyrocketed after that because it did make it easier and quicker. And there was magazines and there was getting to be a lot of people out. You could find someone who would teach you fairly easy, whereas really didn't back in the day. I really think a lot of it in later years. I started with the recurve. The compound, I knew I could kill a deer with it. It wasn't that big a deal. I had successfully taken several deer with it. I'd taken many with a gun by that time. And I guess I'd have to say that it was a matter of several things. First of all, filling a tag didn't mean that much to me anymore. I had done it. I had accomplished what I wanted to do. And that was to take a deer with a bow. So just being out in the outdoors and enjoying being out and seeing things. And I mean, during the gun season, things were pretty spooked. And during the bow season, it was just so calm. And I started seeing things and learning things. And it got more about enjoying being out there. It got to the point where I could have killed a lot of deer and didn't. It become more of how close can I get?
Which reminds me, ask Mom to go pull that photo off the wall so we can show it. The photo of the fawn that you took.
She's sewing, I think. The one of the yearling that's on the wall behind me.
Will it come off the wall easily so you can just show it?
Probably. Yeah, because I got interested in photography too.
That photo to me was always really impressive.
Well,
and that I think is a good example of what you're talking about seeing things when you're out there and getting up close and personal with it.
I get this in front of me. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's just an amazing photo.
This was this year's fawn, and it still had its spots. So it was probably, gosh, I don't know, I'm going to say maybe August. I finally kind of broke down and bought a 35 millimeter camera because I'd wanted one forever. So I got a few pictures like that. And, a lot of times during the hunting season, I'd carry a camera with me. I saw two does get in a fight once, and they were standing up on their hind legs trying to hit each other with their front feet. There was a fawn involved, and I never really understood, but it was like the one, I don't know if it had lost its fawn and it was trying to take dibs on the other doe's fawn, and she wasn't having none of that. And that's the first time I'd seen that. And I thought, whoa, boy, I wish I'd had a camera for that. But yeah, and there used to be a place, terraced field. It was in the bluffs back here, and it ran down to a large patch of timber. And the trees came out on each side of the field. The field was real narrow down at that end. And every fall, the bucks would come out on the west side of that narrow strip of field, and there was a pond there, a very small pond, but it kept water. I don't know if there was like a stream or something. They would come up that side, and they would make scrapes and rubs, and there was a certain point when they would do that, usually sometime mid to late October. And then they'd cross that field to the timber on the other side, and then they'd go back the opposite direction, back into the woods. So I would set up on the terrace when it got about that time and watch after work. I'd wait until I'd see those bucks starting to make that round, and I had a place to hunt already down there, and then I'd slip in once I knew they were doing that, and I'd slip into my spot. Anyway, I was sitting on one of those terraces, and it was coming into mid-late October. The rut was starting to come in. Some of the young bucks was feeling their Cheerios. And so I was sitting on a terrace with binoculars watching down there, and I happened to catch movement, and there was a young buck and a doe, and he was pestering her, chasing, whatnot, and she wasn't having nothing to do with that. And I thought it was really strange. She saw me sitting there. And I know that she knew exactly what I was. And I had a bow and arrow sitting there on that terrace, and she came to me. And of course, the buck followed her. And it was just a young buck. And she came to me and walked up right close and just stood there. And she'd look back, and that buck, he just wasn't sure what I was, and he wasn't sure it was a good deal, but he thought, well, she ain't scared of me. Why would I be scared of him? She walked around me, and he was following her, and I mean, I could have reached out and touched her. And I mean, I'm in an open picked soybean field.
In a blind or what?
No, I'm just sitting there on a terrace. Nothing. I mean, I had camouflage outfit on, but that don't do much good there. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was using me. Once he smelled human, he would break and run, and then she'd get him off, leave her alone, And I just sat still. It fascinated me because she gave up her fear of me and used me in an effort to get rid of him. And I thought, well, that was really a neat deal. I thought, now don't tell me they're dumb animals, because they're not.
Yeah. So you've had a lot of encounters with deer, but tell me a story about something else you've had an interesting encounter with.
Well, you got to realize too, from the time I was very young, when I was just a baby, Dad had a pet coyote.
This is the one in the photos that you have, right?
Yes. I was just a baby in a diaper, and there's a picture of me sitting next to the coyote. Back at that time, Mom and Dad, they always had to get a couple of pigs for meat in the freezer, you know. And the coyote, he liked to harass the young pigs, and he was definitely wanted to kill it and eat it. I mean, it was just natural instinct. And that didn't go over real well. And the coyote was given to the Missouri Department of Conservation, and they made a film on the life cycle of a rabbit. And of course, rabbits are primary food of coyotes.
This seems like a good gig for the coyote.
Well, yeah, I mean, they used him, and he was tamed. They filmed him hunting along the edge of a grassy field and whatnot. They won, I don't know how many awards with that film. Years and years and years, much later, I was down at Jefferson City, and there was some people from the Game Commission, and I was talking to this individual, and my dad was still alive at that time. We knew they made movies, but we never ever saw any of them. So I said, hey, I understood that many years ago, the Missouri Department of Conservation made a film, and it won a lot of awards. And I said, the coyote that was in it was our pet. Dad gave that coyote to the Game Commission because it was a pet. It was still wild, but it was a pet. He said, I don't remember any film about a coyote. And I said, well, it wasn't about a coyote. It was something to do with rabbits and stuff. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, he said the Game Commission did make a movie about the life cycle of a rabbit, and he said it won tons and tons of awards. I said, my dad's up in his years. It was our coyote. Dad gave it to the Game Commission. We had to do something with it. You know, I'd like him to see that film. I'd like to see that film. And he said, well, let me check into that. Well, he called me. He says, I found that film. I said, I'd like to buy it if I could. They have copies. Oh, yeah. He said, you can get them through the Game Commission. So he got it for me, and I was able to take it out to Mom and Dad's and show them that film. And Dad got the biggest kick out of that because he'd never seen it, but he knew they made the film. And it wasn't about the coyote, but he was in it briefly. So, yeah, that was a big deal.
So that's our family's claim to fame is the coyote that made it.
Well, not
in the movies.
Yeah, he made the movies, but be honest with you, some years later, I don't know how old I was. I don't know, 8 years old. That's probably not exactly accurate. But Dad and I had been working out in the fields. It wasn't quite dark yet, but we was coming home, and we run onto some guys. And I was young. I never understood what the big deal about digging out a badger den. Didn't sound like anything that anybody totally of a right mind or sober would want to do, because a badger is not something you want to mess with. Well, anyhow, they had 3 baby badgers, didn't even have their eyes open, that they had dug out of the den. Why? I mean, the poor things, they didn't even have their eyes open. Of course, I was a little kid, and I threw a fit with Dad. I said, I want one of those. The only thing I can figure out was he figured it was going to die anyway, so just to shut me up, I got me a baby badger. I went home. Dad said, what are you going to feed it? Told my sisters, I said, don't you have a baby doll bottle? Well, yeah. I said, well, could we poke a hole in the end of it and fill it up with milk? Dad said, that ain't going to work. My sister said, well, we're going to try, because we're not going to let it sit there and starve to death. And you know, that badger drank from that baby bottle. And I think I was the first thing that it saw when it first opened his eyes. So I guess I was mama. And we had that badger for years. He had a den out in the old farm shed. And I fed him milk until he was able to eat solid food. And then I fed him hot dogs. He loved hot dogs. And when he got older, he'd go through a pound of hot dogs and nothing flat. We had him for years.
You've got pictures of him playing with your dogs, don't you?
Yes. Dad had a blue tick coonhound pup, and him and that badger would play. You know, they played just like they were puppies. I mean, he would run at that badger, and by the time he got there, the badger would be underground. He would dig straight down. Which didn't go over real well with Mom digging up the yard. And then, of course, Mom liked flowers. She'd go out and plant flowers, and that evening he'd dig them back out. But it was just nature. It was fresh dirt. Fresh dirt meant probably food. And he would he would dig those flowers out, and the next morning Mom would get up after she worked all afternoon planting them, and he dug them all up. It got more and more serious. That was years ago, and that was long before any air conditioning. You know, we had screen doors, and you'd open up the inside doors and hope you could get some air through the screen doors and the windows. Well, his name was Yogi. I made a mistake. He always see me coming out of the house with hot dogs. And
I see where this is going.
Yeah, he learned in the summer when all we had was the screen doors that he could lay on his back and hook his claw under that door and flip it open and roll over and go in the house before the door could shut.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he tore through the screen doors.
No, he figured out how he could lay on his back and hook his claw and flip that door open, and he could roll over and be in the house before it shut. Well, Mom didn't like that, but, you know, kind of tolerated it until he learned he was in the house. It was my fault. I opened the refrigerator and got a package of hot dogs out. He realized now where we kept the hot dogs, which was his favorite food. He could eat a pound of hot dogs and nothing flat. He opened the refrigerator door just like he opened the screen door, hooked his claws under the door, flipped it open, got the package of hot dogs, and was in the other room eating them. Well, the refrigerator door was open. It didn't close. And Mom's, what's going on? And so she closed it and walked in the living room, and he's sitting in there with a pound package of hot dogs, eating hot dogs. Naturally, she went ballistic. I don't know that I could blame her. We just put, you know, the little latch locks on the screen door. And he never offered to tear up the screen. I'm surprised he didn't, but he didn't. He found out he couldn't open it anymore. I remember my older sister was old enough to drive a car, and the Badger would go in the car and go under the passenger side front seat, and he'd lay there. And I remember we was coming back from Hamburg on 275, and there was a soldier walking along the road, and they stopped. Well, he was trying to get to Kansas City. He had to catch a plane. He was been on leave, and he needed to get there, and he was hitchhiking. And so we picked him up from Hamburg to Rockport. There wasn't no interstate or nothing. And he was a nice guy. But when we let him out, he started giving my sisters a lecture that they really should not be picking up strangers in the car, that it was dangerous. And my oldest sister said, well, we're not worried. Well, you should. He said, I mean, I appreciate the ride. I really, really do. But he said, that's too dangerous. And she said, we're not afraid. We got a Yogi. He said, Yogi? What's a Yogi? And he come out from under the seat. And the guy stepped back, you know, and was like, what the heck is that? She said, that's Yogi. He said, what is that, a Wolverine? And she said, no, it's just a badger. He said, badger? I've heard stories about badgers. She said, well, yeah. If you look at those claws he's got, you could understand. But he's tame. He's a pet. And she said, all I'd have to do is squeal, and he'd come out from under there and defend me to the death, which he would have. He said, that's the darndest thing I ever seen. But he said, you still shouldn't pick up strangers. That was their favorite thing. They'd go pick up their friends, other girls, in the car. And eventually, somewhere along the ride, Yogi would come out from under the front passenger seat, which usually end up in a lot of yelling and screaming. And he never hurt nobody. And I mean, he was the best pet I ever had. That's kind of normal. That's the way I grew up. I mean, pet squirrels. When I was really little, I remember Dad, they always had pet squirrels. That was just kind of the way we grew up. Like I said, we lived out in the country, and when we had summer vacation from school, I never seen another kid till school started. But anyway, yeah, I grew up with that, and the bow hunting was my chance to be in the woods and learn and see things that I had never seen before. And you know as well as I a few years ago, I got into this trail camera thing, and I've got Patch Woods, and I have my trail cameras in there year round. It's fascinating. You never know when you go pull those cards what you're going to have pictures of. I've seen so many things. It goes back years ago when I saw those two does fighting over that fawn. I've got multiple pictures of deer standing upright on their back legs. Then it fascinated me to try to figure out what they was doing. I enjoy that immensely.
At a certain point, you started actually making your own traditional.
Oh, yeah.
So talk about how you got into that. What got you started making your own
Well, we'd start getting to the point where you had a lot more access. And there was a gentleman, I apologize, I'm getting old and forgetful. He's Native American. I can't tell you what nation. He was doing a deal on making wooden bows. And it was up in Iowa, and I went. He put on a little evening program about the different woods that he used and this and that and the other. And it just fascinated me because I thought, this would be the ultimate to actually cut down a tree, make a bow, and take a deer with it. And then after his program was over, there was half a dozen of us. I think we were up almost all night with that gentleman. And he tolerated us answering questions, telling us stories and stuff. I really got hooked into that. And I started out making bows with hickory because hickory is very plentiful here. It's easy to come up with. It's easy to get a straight piece. It makes a good durable bow. They're not a pretty bow, but they were simple. You just peel the bark off the back and don't break any of the skin, just peel it off and then remove the wood off the belly and you could make a bow. I made one. I named it the ugly stick because it was terribly ugly, but I put a string on it and it shot an arrow and I was like, wow. So then I started trying to make another one that wasn't quite so ugly. But the fact that it shot an arrow, I thought, wow, that's neat. During that time, I had the opportunity to meet some other people, not all Native American, but most of them, that's where they learned. This one gentleman, I believe he was down in Oklahoma, and he grew up next to the reservation. He learned through them how to make bows. And Osage, which is a hedge tree, which grows around here, but it's harder to find one that's straight, but it's a beautiful wood. You have to treat those differently than you do hickory. Hickory, just peel the bark off the back and you got the back of the bow. Osage, you can't do that. You peel the bark off and you have to get in a growth ring and you have to stay in that growth ring. Well, once you get to the handle section, you might be able to cheat and go into a different growth ring, but through the limbs, you have to be in, or it'll break. You have to stay in that growth ring. So I tried to stay in the same growth ring, which in general was the process. From the one tip of the bow clear to the other one, you had to stay in that growth ring. If you got good, thick growth rings, it's easy. Well, not easy. It's a lot of work, but it's some of the most beautiful wood. One of the gentlemen I talked to, he would speak of the Osage orange. They'd make a bow out of it, and he would tip it in the light, and he called it fire. But in that growth ring of that Osage, when the light hits it, it's hard to explain, but it lights up. And if you tilt it just right, it looks like, well, they called it fire. You could see it in the growth ring of the wood. It lit up. I had made several out of hickory and I was learning. Every one I made got a little bit better, but then that built me up where I finally thought I was good enough to take a chance on ruining a precious piece of Osage, because finding a straight piece, I'm going to say 7-8 foot long, because usually the bows were a little over 6 foot when they were finished. Finding a straight one and whatnot, they make a beautiful, beautiful bow, the wood.
The very first one you made me was out of Osage,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Yes.
And then that's the one that I couldn't shoot straight for whatever reason.
Well, it's how you choose to make them. The Osage bows that I made, there was no arrow rest where you grip the bow in the middle and the arrow set on your finger.
Well, I don't think the English longbow you made me has one either.
No. It depends on what you're trying to recreate.
That Osage bow you made me was a buffalo bow.
Yes,
short ones.
Short. It was a replica of what they used shooting off horseback, shooting buffalo. Well, you couldn't have a real long bow. At a sesquicentennial, myself and a friend of mine set up a booth, and we didn't know what we was doing. We just knew that they was going to bring in a group of 6 or 8 school kids, and they would be there so many minutes, and then they would go out and another group would come in. So we played it by ear because we'd never done anything like this and we wasn't sure how to do it. The first 2 or 3 groups of kids, the questions they asked us actually ended up forming our program for the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. And they all come through in these little groups, and I think there was close to 1,000 kids all together through the course of the day. And we was given a very brief history, and I was talking about the English longbow. And I said, does anybody know why we went from this English longbow over in England? Now here in America, they're shooting these little short bows. The little boy raised his hand. He said, well, sure. He said, because the Indians shot off the back of a horse, and they couldn't use them big old long bows that hit the horse. And I thought, no, that kid's pretty sharp. But anyway, we did that show. We were in the kids' room. Then the next day, it was open to the public. And we had logs that were split into quarters and stuff. Still had the bark on them. And different stages, you know, where we took the bark off and followed a single growth ring. And the woods that you didn't have to do that. And we had different stages where people could see it. And maybe some farmer come in. He said, I know what that is. He said, we made hedge posts out of it. I said, that's right. I said, I remember when Ever Fence had several hedge posts, usually corner posts in particular. I can remember going out and here'd be this fence post that's big as your arm, and you might dig down under the ground, and it might be 2 or 3 times big. They didn't rot. You could put that in the ground. They didn't rot. They didn't break off. For fence posts, they last forever. Going back to that show, as it turned out, where our booth was set up, there was a group of, and I used to know the name of it, and I apologize that I don't remember it. There was a group of Native Americans. They had an authentic Native American campsite. And it ended up late in the afternoon. We was all sitting around, and they was telling their tales. Before long, everybody there was circled around our area, and it come evening, and they had a supper, and they kept coming out there and said, this is over. You need to come and eat a meal if you're going to. And then they come up, now got 30 minutes, and it's going to close down. You're going to miss out on the food. And so finally, we all said, well, we're going to go eat. So everybody finally went in and ate. It was the first time that we'd ever done anything like that. And according to the people that put this on, the kids on Saturday voted us best of show. And Sunday, when it was open to the public, we were voted best of show again. And they said that had never, ever happened. Well, it was a lot more than just us. It was a lot of the other people that made it happen that gathered around and started talking and whatnot. I did another little sesquicentennial type deal, and I had some of my stuff laying on the table, and a friend of mine had some more modern archery. He made bows, but he made fiberglass laminated, and I was making the wood, and there was 3 or 4 young men going through, and finally they worked around and they come to the table, and he picked up the bow and he looked at it, and he says, that's really neat. Well, we got to talking. Well, I found out that his father had taught him how to flint knap. But the making the bows, he was fascinated looking at the bows, and I talked to him. He asked questions about how I did this and that. And he said, boy, he says, when I get home, Dad's going to have a lot of questions to answer, because he said, he taught me how to make the airheads, how to flint knap. But he said, I know nothing about making the bows. Yeah, I tried learning flint knapping too. And I found out that's a blood sport. You're talking about one of the sharpest substance there is. I never made anything really that looked very good. My goal was to make my own bow, make my own arrow, and put a flint point on it and take a deer. I did everything except I never was any good at making the arrowheads. I went to some of these flint knapping things and met some pretty neat people. And I've got an arrow made up by a friend of mine and was given to me so I could go and take a deer, but it was one of those things that I wanted to do.
Was it easier to find information about how to make the English longbows than it was to?
Well, so I got the internet. Well, I didn't have a lot of, and then people started writing books, and knowledge was starting to be shared, or at least I was finding the groups of people that were there to share and to teach. And I put on deals myself. I'm not an expert, but I wasn't seeing it anywhere, anyone locally doing it. And I was fascinated with it and got into it enough. And I've done some stuff, and with schools and kids and stuff. I love that. Anyway, the spring turkey season, those birds made fool of me for years and years. One thing about a turkey is his eyesight is tremendous. He doesn't have a sense of smell like a deer. That's usually what will get you caught by the deer is his sense of smell and his eyesight, but it's nothing like a turkey. I would get close, and as soon as you make the movement to pull that bow back, that turkey's gone. I bought a commercial blind. You know about blinds because you went with me that one morning. We got caught in a rainstorm. Well, now let me back up. I set up a blind for you to take pictures with your camera. I think this was before.
I went with you when I was a kid because that's how I knew I hated coffee.
but
or I hated your coffee.
You know, you got to be able to taste it. But you took pictures of some deer and turkeys from that blind, and then I ended up shortly after that taking the turkey out of that blind, but it still wasn't. Every time I'd go to pull that bow back, they would see me and they were gone. And I tried using some camouflage material, tried putting it behind me, I tried putting it in front of me, and it didn't make any difference. As I moved, and you can't draw the bow without moving, they would see me and they were gone. I heard these turkeys coming, flock of hens, and they were scratching and talking back and forth to each other real quietly and scratching. Coming down the hillside, of course the hens wasn't legal to shoot, so I had no intention of shooting them or anything. And they were coming down the hillside, coming right to me, and I grabbed a piece of that material and I pulled it over the top of my head. I mean, I was frustrated. I said, how do you do this? I understand why everybody uses a blind. So I pulled that material over the top of me, and these turkeys come in there and they scratched around and walked all around me and everything, you know, and I thought, wow, this is cool. I mean, they were within feet of me, and I had that camouflage material over the top of my head, and they didn't have a clue I was there. Of course, I wasn't trying to move to draw the bow, and I thought, okay, I'm starting to get an idea here. I had read in the old days in England and stuff, they used what they called the ghillie suit. And I started looking at them. And well, later on, I think Scott got me one for Christmas or something. Anyway, the commercial ones I didn't like because there's complications of shooting a bow. String will grab that material and it'll deflect where the arrow goes. So I started making my own and modifying it here and modifying it there. I learned that the headpiece is the most critical part of an entire ghillie suit. I mean, I think you could just wear regular camouflage if you use the headpiece.
Why is that?
Well, I don't know. If you sit and look at us right now sitting here talking, my head stands out separate from my shoulders. And if I move my head, that's movement is so easy to see. So I ended up making a special hat, and I used camouflage material, and I cut it in strips, and you can buy strings of material, and I would tie them on. Well, anyway, I took a hat, took the camouflage like a big gunny sack and threw it over the top of it, and I trimmed, and I'd shoot my bow. It went down over my shoulders and down my back and down my chest, and I left an opening in front of my eye where I could pull that bow back and where that string come up in front of my eye and I could see. All the rest of it was all blocked out, and this was the key. It has to go clear down over your shoulders and down in front of your chest, because once you do that, then you can turn your head and they don't see that movement, and it changed everything. I mean, it was a challenge because it's easy enough to make a big old bulky thing and go out there and sit down, but if you got to shoot a bow, it's a whole different story. The rest of the turkeys I took, no commercial blind, just sitting in the woods. Usually I had a bucket because that's what I carried my ghillie suit, and they'd snag on everything. And I would put it in a bucket and carry into where I wanted, take it out, put it on, flip the bucket over, and set on the bucket. Once I got it to where I could shoot the bow without the string catching, I killed 5 spring gobblers with a recurve bow with that ghillie suit, no commercial blind, no nothing. And I felt like as far as hunting, that was probably my greatest accomplishments, was be able to do that, because I don't shoot far. Most all the turkeys I killed was anywhere from 10, 15, maybe a little over 15 yards. And when you got one that close, if you can fool him, I think it was one of the biggest challenges and learning curve. Took me years to get that ghillie suit and learn through trial and error. But yeah, that was I still look at that as being one of my biggest challenges.
So you've been hunting for a long time. What do you think is the biggest thing about hunting that's changed since you've been doing it? Not just with you, but I mean in general.
Well, I can go out and sit in the woods and have deer that I could have shot that I didn't. I was just simply satisfied of being there, watching, learning. It evolves into watching and learning. Yeah, I still take deer. The meat in the freezer, we love it. It's as pure and natural a food source, but I don't have to. And most of the time I don't. And I'm not condemning because there's a lot of fighting in the archery community. The modern technology changed things. I think it took a lot of woodsman skills out of it. I mean, people do what they want to do. It's all, as long as it's legal and ethical, I don't have a problem with it. And we all walk our own path. And for me, using technology to be able to shoot an animal 100 yards with a bow and arrow, for goodness sake. But it's legal. But to me, it's about learning the wildlife, learning to go in the woods, become part of the woods. I mean, when you're sitting there and animals, you can almost touch them and they don't know you're there. To me, it's a high. I mean, I get a tremendous kick out of it. By the same token, when I first started out, I wanted to be able to say that I did that. The high tech, it's great. It gets people in there, and lets people do it that couldn't have done it before. And, as long as they respect the animal in the woods, there's room for all of us. But my goodness, it's been a few years since I have even shot a deer. And I go a lot because I love it. I enjoy it. Putting that ghillie suit on and sitting down next to a tree and having animals just almost touch you. It's been a blast. I still remember, going with my dad, and I enjoy being out there. The older I get, well, I know a lot of that I'm not going to necessarily be able to do from the hunting standpoint, but I can still go out in the woods. Well, I love those trail cameras. I go pull cards out of my cameras. You have no idea what you might have a picture of.
Have you ever gotten Bigfoot?
I thought I did once. Oh, that's been a joke with us for a long time. And I plead guilty. I have watched some of the dumbest Bigfoot shows. And I did have a camera that got ate up.
Bigfoot ate it?
Well, I tell you what, if I would have saved the pictures, which I did not, I destroyed them. But one of the last pictures that camera took when it hit the ground after it had been ripped off the tree, the camera was chewed all to pieces, teeth marks and stuff all over it. But that last picture was extreme close-up of what appeared to be a large, extremely hairy, with red hair creature. And I know it was a squirrel, but I sometimes I look back on it, wish I'd have saved the picture, but I didn't. I guess it's more fun to not have the picture and tell about it.
What's the scariest or creepiest thing you've encountered in the woods? Or the most unexplainable?
Oh, I don't know. Off the top of my head, you kind of. I went coon hunting with Dad once. Years ago, there was a time period when people were seeing mountain lions here, which is not a native animal. Eventually, some years later, I did get to see one. I don't know. I could tell a few stories. There was some fellows from Nebraska City. One of the gentlemen was a big man, worked for the railroad. But he was telling me a story. Said he went bow hunting, got out before daylight, went and climbed the ladder up, got in his tree stand, and he stuck his flashlight in his back pocket, and he had his bow tied to a string, and he was pulling it up and got it all ready and got situated. And he said the sky was starting to get first signs of daylight, but he said still a long ways till daylight. And he said he sat down, got his bow. He just kind of glanced up, and he said there was this light coming down out of the sky, and it was shining right on top of him. And he said, I just didn't move. He said, I didn't know what to do. And as it went along, I realized this guy, he might have been just a little spooky about being in the woods in the dark, but he's a big guy. He could wrestle a bear. But he said finally it spooked him out, and he said he decided he was going to leave, and he said he tied the string back to his bow and let it down, and he stood up, and he said that light went away. And he said he stood there for a long time waiting to see if that'd come back, and it didn't. So he said he got a hold of that string, and he pulled his bow back up, and he said I sat back down, and he said it sat there for a while, and he said pretty soon, he said I looked up, and he said there that light was coming down out of the sky, shining right on top of me. He said, scared me to death. He said, I let my bow down, and he said, I went down that ladder. He said, I think I only touched every other rung in that ladder. And he said, I got to the bottom, and he said, I cut that string, grabbed the bow, and he said, I headed for the pickup. And he said, I got in the pickup and shut the door, and he said, the light, it was inside the pickup. He said, I realized, he said, the flashlight was in my back pocket, and every time I sat down, it pushed the button, and the light come on, and the light was shooting up behind me, up into the sky, and when I looked up, I thought it was coming down out of the sky. We all laughed, you know, it was a funny story, and probably mostly a made-up one, but it was still funny. It really was.
I thought you were gonna say it was the moon. You can't think of any stories that of your own, like no experiences that were scary?
Oh, probably could. Just off the top of my head, I'm not for sure, but
not any recently.
Well, not any recently, no. It's amazing with those cameras during the time of the year when the birds migrate. I pulled the cards and I had this picture, and I first looked at it and I didn't have my eyes focused quite right, and the sky through the trees looked black, and I thought, what on earth? And I realized it was a huge flock of some kind of blackbird or a black colored bird, and they were flying and they were in mass, and it blackened the whole sky inside the forest. Since then, I've got that picture several times, and it's just they're migrating, and they're gathered up in huge flocks.
I remember looking at that photo because what struck me as odd, which, I mean, I don't know why necessarily, I guess just because of the sheer number of them, but they were down in the trees.
They were down in the trees, and there was hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of them. I mean, it just black, and it was down in the trees. It wasn't up above. They were coming down in there, I guess, feeding.
What has been one of the biggest lessons that you've learned from being out in nature?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. There's so many little ones. I think the more you're out in it, you start seeing things. It's too complex just to be an accident. But I enjoy it. I don't know how many years it's been since I've even shot a deer with my bow. I don't care. Anytime that I go out there and sit down and I can have a deer that I could almost reach out and touch, and it doesn't even know that I'm sitting there. It's just a neat feeling to be that close. It goes way beyond just wanting to shoot something.
Is there still some kind of a challenge or something, a goal that you still want to achieve?
I don't know. I guess maybe where I'm at right now I'm shooting a modern recurve bow. I'm not shooting my wood bows. I'm getting old enough now, to be honest, I can't handle the poundage that I used to shoot. I've had to come down in poundage quite a lot, but it's just getting close, being able to get close and animals not knowing you're there. I suppose maybe as far as hunting, and it's not a big deal to me, but when you get into mature whitetail deer, buck or doe, and you can get that close without them knowing you there, then to me I've accomplished what I wanted to do. I guess maybe the most mature animals with my less technical equipment, but I don't
because it's a show of more skill than just skill and knowledge.
I mean, it's a lifetime of learning. You never stop learning. We go during farm season, and Scott, he kills deer. Me and him go. It's time together in the woods. As long as he can put some meat in the freezer, see, I don't really have to. I can go and enjoy the whole season. I'm old now, so I think if I eventually get to where I can't pull a bow, as long as I can get out in the woods and walk, I'll have my cameras out there, and I'll be sitting somewhere in a ghillie suit just watching to see what I can see and enjoying every bit of it. I grew up in the woods and around the animals and the wildlife and the birds, and it's just, I don't have to kill anything anymore. I just enjoy being out there. me and a buddy go out and set and then come in and talk to each other about what we saw and this and that and the other. And squirrels have provided probably as much or more entertainment over the years. Early on, when I first started bow hunting, they'd be out on the ground getting acorns and stuff, and I think, well, I'll just get me a squirrel for supper. And don't think that squirrel doesn't know you're sitting there. You think, oh boy, I got him fooled. He ain't there by the time the arrow gets there.
What do you think is something that humans misunderstand about wildlife or nature?
It depends on at what level your connection with nature is. I think sometimes folks have a misconception, maybe, that's not really been around to do it. There's a lot of fussing and stuff about hunting and whatnot. I mean, hunting's managed. You've got trained professionals that keep track of the populations. I actually was fortunate. I got to do a piece with USA Today and had a photographer and a guy that actually went with me and my son, and we went on a hunt one morning, and I took him around the area, and he said he was so shocked. I guess I broke a lot of misconceptions of what he thought hunting and hunters. And I'm not saying there ain't some poachers. Most good hunters hate a poacher because he's stealing from all of us. Of course, I might get myself in trouble because if folks down the road from me, if their kids was hungry and they went out and poached a deer to feed their kids, I'd never say a word. But just to do it, I never understood that. Anyway, that's off the subject. Yeah, it's changed a lot. It really has. I was able to work with or go game commission meetings and stuff and learn what they've done. It was really interesting to be able to be a part of it.
Is there anything else you want to add before we stop?
Oh, I don't know. There's probably something we didn't touch on, but no, I don't think so.
Well, it's hard. How old are you? 70 something. So after that long, that many years of time outdoors, it's hard to condense that into a
I think I'll be 72 next month. Still enjoy it. I really do.
Any advice for young hunters or archers or outdoors people in general?
Don't overlook the little things and enjoy every little bit of it. It's not just what you're hunting. There's everything out there from little stuff right on up to big. Just sit back and enjoy it. Don't take it all too serious. Enjoy it while you can.
Well, we'll have to do another one and talk about dogs.
Well, yeah, that too. That's another thing that's always been a big part of my life. I've had all different kinds of dogs from the time I was little to now. So.
Including coyotes.
Yes, coyotes and badgers.
I'm going to have to find that picture and show it to you. Let me see if I can send it to you real quick, because it looks like a fox to me, but it's so little, it could be a coyote. It's you sitting on the front step, and Granddad is in there, and somebody else is there. There's a teeny tiny red fuzzy.
Yeah, I think it is a fox.
That's what I was thinking it was a fox.
I don't remember having the fox, so it either didn't make it or... Because these animals we had ran wild. They were not caged, none of them. So if another fox come along and he met one of his own kind and decided to leave with them, they left with them. But they could come and go as they pleased. They could leave if they wanted to. None of these were ever pinned up. They were free to come and go. The badger was a lot of fun because he stayed in the garage in the old shed down there, and I got in so much trouble for not putting Dad's wrenches, his tools back. He's all the time mad at me because I wouldn't put the tools up. We was in there talking one day, and I looked over, and there goes Yogi. He's got Dad's brand new shiny wrench and took it in the hole and took it down the den. I said, Dad, see that? See that? I don't know how many wrenches is buried down under there, but I know I got a lot of tongue lashings for not putting Dad's wrenches up. It wasn't me. Dad seen him carry it down that hole. Yeah, it was fun. So.
I'm trying to find that picture. I'm determined to find it real quick.
Yeah. You bring that up. I don't remember that per se.
You looked to be about like 4 or 5.
Yeah, and the coyote, I was a baby. I don't even remember the coyote.
Yeah, you were in diapers in that picture.
But Yogi, he was my buddy. even if he did get me in trouble. Well, I guess if that's about it. I guess.
Well, hang on. I'm trying to find that picture. It's in here somewhere. It was one of the old slides that Scott digitized.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I do remember it, but I don't remember us having a fox.
I found it.
Did you? Sitting on the concrete steps in front of the house or something?
Yep.
Yeah. I remember that picture. I think that's a fox. I don't remember having it.
Looks like a fox to me, but it's so tiny.
Yeah, it's a fox. Yeah.
So you don't remember the story behind that?
No, I don't. I do not remember that. Of course, you can see one of Dad's coonhounds sitting right behind him. The dogs never. I mean, these dogs never paid any attention to these wild animals that we had for pets.
Do you think that that's just because they knew it wasn't what they were supposed to be hunting, or?
I think so. It was anything that we had. It was around the house. The dogs got used to it. It was there since the time it was a baby, so it knew that it was supposed to be there, and they never offered to ever bother any of it. Of course, Yogi, once he got a little bit older, of an evening or whenever that Mom had any leftovers, the dogs got them. And Yogi ate with the dogs. When they threw table scraps out on the ground, and they tried to spread them out so there wouldn't be any fights, and he was eating right with the dogs, and they did not mess with him. They never bothered, never offered to. And I think he'd probably taught them a little lesson if they even thought about it. If he needed to be, he was a very ferocious animal. But yeah, we had one that had a blue tick coon dog puppy that grew up with Yogi, and I got pictures of them playing. They would eat out of the same bowl, and they run and chased each other and played. So anyway.
All right. Well, I guess that's it for now.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for being willing to do this.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. You know as well as anybody else that I really feel privileged that I grew up the way I did. Was around nature and wild animals, pets. I know they frown on that nowadays. Probably a good idea, but it was different back then. And
well, I think you guys had a better understanding of the whole. You know, the reason they frown upon it these days is because so many people are disconnected from nature and don't understand.
Well, and a lot of things, and I don't think it's a big deal like it used to be, but baby deer. There was a lot of people saying, bringing in baby deer and say, well, the mother went off and left it. Well, not really. She didn't desert it. They do go off and leave them. It's really neat to find a baby deer like that, very young, laying in the leaves. But Mama left it there, and she will be back.
I guess that's it.
All righty. Well, okay. You go ahead and disconnect this, and I'll go eat dinner.
Sounds like a plan. I'll talk to you later.
All right, bye.
Bye.